Welcome to Mental Health Awareness for Indigenous Students, supporting wellness and healthy strategies. Miigwech for taking the time to join us today. We know that times have been challenging, so we're here to share some good conversation and discover tools to help you build and maintain your own wellness. This is a safe space for 2S LGBTQ+, Indigenous people, people from the Black community, racialized people, and people living with disabilities. This event is part of a larger mental health project generally sponsored by the Slate Family Foundation. With their support, we are able to partner with leading experts in mental health, like the Center for Addictions and Mental Health, Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario, and CAMH Shkaabe Makwa, to create advisory groups, events, and resources to support mental health and wellness for Indigenous youth and post-secondary students. Now, I'm happy to introduce you to Dr. Christopher Mushquash, Ojibway and a member of Plat First Nation. He is a Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Mental Health and Addiction and a professor in the Department of Psychology at Lakehead University and the Division of Human Sciences at the Northern Ontario School of Medicine, amongst many other things. And I'm sure he'll share more about himself with us. Thank you for joining us, Chris. It's so great to have you here today.
Thank you, and Miigwech, for the invitation, and thank you to our elders today for helping us open the meeting and get started. It was really a really nice way to start the meeting. So welcome to everyone out there. It's a privilege for me to be able to meet with everyone today and talk a little bit about mental health, but importantly, I think also about identity and healing. So I'm going to try to share my screen now. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. It really is a privilege. So Ellie talked a little bit about the kind of work that I've been really fortunate to do, and I want to tell you a little bit about some of those things, because I think, like, for me, I didn't really know any of these things existed, and I keep finding myself walking into rooms or being invited into conversations or into new experiences. And in a lot of the places where I go, I see a large interest and a real enthusiasm for Indigenous youth and what Indigenous youth have to offer all of these conversations. The importance of the ideas and experiences that our young people have to contribute to a whole range of things, all the way from new initiatives to trying to address some of the challenges that we experience in a range of different areas. So I think there are certainly a lot of opportunities now, and I'm really hopeful that so many people on this call will be among those who contribute and offer all of your thoughts and experiences to moving forward a lot of the work that people need help with. So in part of my role, I'm a research chair at Lakehead University. So I'm calling in today from Thunder Bay, Ontario, where I'm a professor here and Canada Research Chair. It's in the Robinson Superior Treaty area, as our elder Ron said a few moments ago. And that treaty area includes my First Nation, Pugwasheen First Nation, Plat, which is a really small community, about an hour and 45 minutes east of Thunder Bay, right on the Trans-Canada Highway. I actually grew up in Sioux Lookout as well, which is about 4.5 hours northwest of Thunder Bay, so a rural community. So a little bit about my work is that I've done teaching, I've done research work. I'm also a psychologist, so I see patients, children, adolescents, and adults at Denesuline Family Care, which is a organization in Thunder Bay that is a partnership between the Robinson Superior Treaty Area First Nations, and it has mandates in mental health, addiction, health, but also child welfare. So I get to work with families and kids and adolescents and adults across a whole range of mental health difficulties and addiction difficulties. So it's a real privilege for me to be able to do that work. And then in some of my other research work, I direct a Center for Rural and Northern Health Research. So we do a lot of community engaged research. We've looked at things like evaluating on reserve opioid treatment programs, land-based programs, etc. So if you're interested, you could search the center on Google. And as well, I'm at the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Center today, where I'm the Vice President of Research and the Chief Scientist of the Research Institute here. So I really see research and clinical work as important to really bring Indigenous perspectives into. So again, people ask me how I became a psychologist and a researcher, and I don't, I thought about that for a long time, because I said a moment ago, I didn't really know any of this existed. I didn't really have a sense of that. And I sort of just found myself being fortunate and meeting some people, some role models and some mentors who were encouraging. But then I really got thinking about how I became a psychologist. And the best way I can answer it is that when I was about 6 years old or 7 years old, I used to do a lot of hunting with my dad. And there was this one spot where we used to hunt. And one day we got to this place where the trail broke off into two different directions, and he sent me by myself down one direction of the trail. And I was pretty fearful. If you're a young person in the bush, it can be fearful. I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you get a bit nervous and you can feel your forehead get really hot and you're sweating, and you hear something moving through the bush that sounds like a dinosaur, but it's actually a squirrel. When it comes out on the pathway, and you're really, your heart's beating and you're racing to get to wherever you're going. And I got back to the place where the trails met up again, which was only maybe a kilometer or two. It wasn't, tremendously far, but certainly far enough for a 6 or 7 year old. And I looked down the trail and I could see my dad's orange vest further down. He didn't wait. I had to catch up with him. And I was probably crying and I was probably pretty upset. And I got home and my mother probably asked him, what happened, or asked me what happened. And in any case, that was that. And the next time we went hunting, we got to that same spot, and I thought he's gonna send me that way again, and he did, and I was fearful again. And that kept happening. It happened 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times. And anyway, at some point, we got to that spot, and I said to him, "I'm going to go this way." And what had happened was I was no longer afraid. I had done it enough, and I knew, where I was going now, that I was confident to be able to do it on my own. And I think that's why I'm a psychologist. So, I think what happened was a couple things. One, I was a bit of an anxious kid. I was a bit nervous, and I think my dad knew that, and so he treated me, quote unquote, in the way that he was taught, in a more cultural way, in order to help encourage young people who might be anxious to kind of face those things that they're fearful of, and develop the confidence and ability to contend with those. Interestingly, in clinical psychology, that's actually called exposure, and it's actually one of the most effective evidence-based approaches, quote unquote, from a psychological perspective we have for dealing with things like anxiety or low mood or even trauma. So, I didn't know it, but I was being given a cultural intervention, but also a very effective evidence-based intervention at the same time. But I think the bigger lesson that I learned that was one that carried me throughout my life was whenever I got to a challenging situation that I didn't really know if I was going to be able to do it, I gave it a shot. I gave it a try. And then I was really lucky, as I said, to have mentors who would teach me and take the time to show me things, so that I could learn. And I think that, these types of stories are really, really important. We need to really think through and learn about ourselves and learn about those things that have helped orient us to whatever it is that we're orienting toward. But importantly, to really think and have, space to consider what it is that we might like to do later, and have mentors and people available. So sessions like this are really, really important because it connects us and allows us to know of each other, and form relationships that, if people do have questions about, how to go about doing things, that you run into people. You might remember a story, that then you can, activate those resources that you might, be able to use to pursue those things that you want. I think we know a lot about the types of adversities that many in our communities experience. We know that the colonial imposition, let's call it that, of residential school and reserve systems and child welfare system, et cetera, has traditionally been used in a way that's been quite disruptive to our communities and our practices and our cultures and our languages and all other things. But in addition, it's resulted in a number of things that we contend with, still. And among those things, are mental health difficulties, addiction difficulties, but also other broader health related difficulties, and those other things that we know about, like poverty, difficulties accessing healthy food, clean water, etc. So we know then that adversity, and there's a large research base on this, that adversity particularly in our youth, in our childhood and our youth, as we're young people, is really quite important in terms of how it has the potential to affect us later on, and in particular how it affects the way that we develop. So when it comes to trying to develop the best foundation for being well, there are some important things that we need to pay attention to. One is doing the very, very best we can to prevent the types of adversities that we know are disrupting in the long run. So when I say adversity, I don't mean a difficult thing that you have to accomplish. I don't mean things like that. I mean things that are overwhelming and things that that are not appropriate for a young person to develop, to contend with, at specific ages. So, I'm talking more about the difficult circumstances of abuse and neglect and these types of things, household challenges. Adversity sometimes is used a bit broadly, but I gave an example earlier of going, being sent by myself in the bush. That in that case is not considered adversity. What that's considered is sort of a developmentally appropriate challenge that a child is given, right? So we're not talking about things like that. We're really talking about harm, and harm that's done, and then really working to prevent it. So anytime we support a family member, anytime we support a young person such that they're not subject or made to experience something that's harmful, we are doing very important work. The work that we're doing is actually, really supporting the healthy development of a young person, from their brain all the way through their mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual wellness as well. And those things we know require very, very important things like attachment. And that is being biologically, spiritually, physically attached to other people in our lives who have our best interests in their mind. And this happens all the way from birth, and it's very, very important in terms of processes all the way through your childhood and adolescence. And it helps set up the blueprint for how you're going to experience relationships later in life, and the nature of how those relationships will go in many ways. So in that way as well, it helps, having very healthy and strong attachments when we're young helps us to become adults who are able to give that to other people as well. Children are in our relationships, and otherwise. When these types of things are disrupted, what actually happens is it makes it a little more difficult for our brains to do some important functions. And those functions include having the best results when we're in a situation that involves planning or decision making, having the best results when situations that involve somehow monitoring ourselves and correcting an error that we've made, or troubleshooting a situation and trying a different approach. Novel situations or new situations where our reactions, our responses aren't well practiced or well rehearsed. So, really, unexpected situations. It affects the way in which we are able to judge whether or not something's dangerous or something's technically difficult, something that we might be at risk if we engage in. And as well, situations that require overcoming a strong habit, a response, or resisting temptation. And what you can see is that these are in a larger kind of bucket of things called executive functions. And it's just a fancy word for a range of functions that our brain is responsible for, but that direct our behavior. And we know that when we disrupt attachment, when we experience adversity, that sometimes these types of things can be affected. Now, the good news is that there are ways in which we can help heal and help be supported through being able to navigate these types of situations in a different way. So I want to show a picture really quickly here. This is a picture that I found online. I really like it because in this picture, there's so many foundations of what it means to be well. Like there are things you can see that are sort of really obvious, right? So you've got shelter and you've got water and fire and air, and you've got medicine, and you've got healing there. Presumably there's food, that's there. You've got some implements that you might be able to use in order to get your work done that you need for survival, etc. So, all those things are there, and they're there in the environment. But there's some other really important things that are here that we can't see as well. And those things include things that we need as people, and the things that the environment, the natural environment, but as well the relationships that we have that are grounded here provide for us. And that is, we've got predictability, we've got consistency. When I say warmth here, I don't mean like heat. I mean we warmth in relationships, right? So being around other people who care for us. We are validated for our work here. When you're on the land, when you do something, there's a result that you get to see, and maybe it helps you, or maybe it helps somebody else. There are clear expectations. There's things that need to get done, and there's clear consequences that happen if those things don't get done. So if you don't collect enough firewood, then the fire goes out. If you don't collect enough food, then you've got to go get enough food, etc. So there are consequences, and what those things. So those are natural in the environment, and the environment provides that. The other thing that it provides is, as we navigate these things, we develop what's called self-efficacy. So that's the ability and the belief in ourselves that we're able to do something that we put our minds to. And that's a very, very important thing. Oftentimes when people have had difficult lives, that's one of the things that gets disrupted, is our ability to believe that we're able to accomplish something that we put our minds to. And that's an important lesson that we need to pay attention to for our youth, so that they're empowered, that they feel that all of us feel that we have the ability to do those things if we need to. There's a few other things here that you can't really see, but they're among the most important for when it comes to mental wellness. And that is, when you're here, you're very physically active. So physical activity, and there's a large research base about this, is very, very important when it comes to being well. You don't have to be a marathon runner, but you have to move a little bit every day. And that movement has to be sufficient, that your body is getting, the kinds of things that it needs with respect to activity. What you eat here is very, very lean, and it's very, very low in sugar. So you're not going to go find Doritos growing anywhere. You're not going to be carrying, Monster energy drinks or Pepsi or things here either. What you have here is things that help our biology and help our physical self maintain health. It's very structured. So that's an important part. We have to wake up every day and do something, and we have to have structure in our lives. That's very important. If you sleep in here, that's okay, but then things don't get done, the fire doesn't get started, etc. And there's things that you can't do here, like watch Netflix in the evenings or game or whatever. That's not here. And that contributes to the last thing that's also in this picture is sleep. The natural environment, is important in helping regulate our sleep. So it ensures that we get the requisite amount of sleep we need each night, and that differs depending upon our age. But it also it makes sure that those things aren't disrupted by other things in our lives. So those things here are really important. What I often try to encourage young people to do is, well, not just young people, but adults as well, is to take the lessons that we know from the land, and where we can, we bring them into our house, we bring them into our lives. So if we know that we need structure, and the structure, provides us with predictability and consistency, well, then we do what we can to put that in place. If we know we need our sleep regulated, then what we do is we do all the things that we need to do to make sure that that's going well. We build in physical activity in our lives. We focus really on trying to do the very best, again, with respect, and in full understanding that food security is a very important issue in our communities. But we do our very best to try and avoid things that we know can be disruptive to our health, and we bring all those lessons back in our houses with us, back in our lives with us as the best we can. We don't necessarily need to be on the land in order to know what the lessons from the land are and bring them in our lives. So that's really important. So these culture-based approaches, again, are things that can really help ground us in a number of ways. One, because there's very good approaches, and we've got elders here today who are very well aware of these things that can help ground us, can help support our emotional processes, can help support our spiritual health, and so on, in a way that helps build a full person. And in that way, what we're really trying to do is develop our identities. Identities are very, very broad things. Our identities are built around a lot of different things, but they're very, very important. In biomedical or psychological kind of approaches, the idea of identity is kind of not really there as in focus as it is in our cultural approaches. So what I mean by that is that, if you are an athlete, for example, and you hurt yourself, and you go see your doctor, and your doctor says, well, I've got to refer you to a specialist, and then you go to your specialist appointment, and the specialist says, well, you're going to need a surgery. So what I'd like you to do is we're going to get that booked, and before you do that, you're going to go to a physiotherapist, because you're going to do a whole bunch of pre-work to ensure that you're as strong as you can be in the areas that we need to deal with. And then you'll have your surgery. Then after that, you'll go back to physio, and you'll do every single thing that physiotherapist says. And the reason is not because of your great belief in all of these medical professions and all of the different, approaches that'll be taken. Although, medicine is doing pretty amazing things when it comes to these types of interventions. But the real reason why you'll do all those things and why you'll pay attention to those things is because that's who you are. You're an athlete, and you're going to get back on the track or in the pool or on the hockey rink as fast as you can. And so what motivates you to do all those things that you need to do is who it is you believe you are, for example. So it's there in biomedical approaches, but it's not like the focus. Whereas in cultural approaches, it's central to who you are. Our elders, Ali, myself, we all introduced ourselves today in a way that helped give you an understanding of who it is we are and where we come from. It's foundational to know those things, and those things, of course, are among those that have been disrupted, in terms of what's happened to our communities and cultures over the last couple hundred years. But when you engage in cultural approaches as well, the grounding in identity is one of the most important aspects of that. It's grounded in place and time and relationship and all of those things that we know help us build a healthy picture of who we are. It's never sort of limited to one aspect of our life. Rather, it's all of those things about us. So you know who you are as, say, an Indigenous young person in a community, in a family, as a sibling, as a cousin, as an auntie, as a dancer, as a singer, as an athlete, as a student, as a cook. All those things that contribute to who you are, and that helps provide that foundation for times when things may not go as well as they could. It's that place where we begin to be able to stand and endure and heal from the types of experiences that might come our way. So with that, I want to just say I'm looking forward to our other presentation today. I'm looking forward to engaging in any questions and conversations that we have. And I just want to say Miigwech for the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you today about mental health and identity and healing. So thank you.
Give me a second, bring up my slides. Alrighty, hopefully you all can see that. All right, so yeah, so my name is Jason Mercredi. I'm located in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Treaty 6 territory, traditional homeland of the Métis. So I'm here to talk to you about mental health, Indigenous mental health, and kind of how that plays out with living in Canada right now. So some of you may have seen this model before. It's called this is called the 4 pillars of harm reduction. Now, the reason that I'm using the 4 pillars of harm reduction, in this example is this is an example of the type of systems that we as Indigenous people have to exist in that are supposed to address systematic issues. But you can tell from this that this is just from looking at the model, you can tell that this is a very colonial model for how to address a very complex issue, which is mental health and addictions in Canada. This was also developed under the Harper government. Boo, hiss, we don't like them. They were kind of bad news for the community, to be frank. They definitely did some things in terms of the apology, but really when it came down to addressing a lot of systemic issues, they were maintaining, if not enhancing, colonial systems that we as Indigenous people have to exist in. And so when we're looking at mental health and addictions, this was the example that we got given, which was the 4-pillar model. And if you look at the model, you would think that they're all treated equally. All of them are the same size, but they weren't interested in prevention. They weren't really interested in harm reduction, so reducing the harms that we experience in the communities and in society. They were more interested in this top-down approach that was really focused on enforcement, so over-policing, over-incarceration. And if you have family members in jail, how is that supposed to help us deal with the mental health and addictions issues? Nobody turned their life around for jail. Very few people did. Most of the folks, it's just going to criminal college, and as a result, you see this spiraling effect that happens in the communities. And Saskatchewan is a great example of that, where we have some of the highest incarceration rates in Canada. We've been asking for more enhanced mental health supports from the provincial government for a number of years now, and instead they decided to build $100-some million remand center. And so they're not really interested in the upstream solutions. They're more interested in the downstream. How does that affect our mental health when we're saying we can't get access to mental health services throughout the province, and yet the provincial government is saying, instead of actually funding that or addressing that, we're just going to build more jails for you to exist in. And then same thing with the treatment. It's forced. It's not. There's no person-centered approach. There's no individualistic approach. It's treatment. This is what you need, and this is what you need if you're living with addictions is treatment. And we see that as pretty much identical when it comes to mental health services for Indigenous people. We get prescribed a lot what we need, and we have to fit within the colonial system. It's not whether you're looking at your benefits, whether they're student benefits, whether they're professional benefits, or your work environment, they're not really conducive to a different way than the Western way. And so when I was at the executive director of Prairie Harm Reduction, we implemented a sick policy that allowed people to go deal with mental health issues, not just physical health issues, on sick days. And so all our employees accrue up to 15 sick days a year. And so that includes if they want to go to ceremony, they don't have to take vacation time. They can take sick time to go to ceremony. And these are little ways that we've adapted our process, and I'm very grateful that I'm now at Métis Nation, Saskatchewan, and I started yesterday, our first staff meeting, and my boss was very clear that if you need a mental health day, you take that mental health day, and that can include for ceremony. And so once again, being an Indigenous, now I'm Indigenous, but I was working in a non-Indigenous organization of Prairie Harm Reduction. I was controlling that organization, so I had the ability to implement some of these policies. But you can see that some of the Indigenous institutions are now starting to adapt their policies so that we can actually be successful, and we don't have to fit into a colonial system. There we go. Okay, so this is the 4-fire model, and really this is what I use as the model when I'm thinking about ways that we can help the community heal and people in the community heal, whether that's staff, whether that's colleagues, whether that's our friends, whether it's our family. And I really go for this 4-fire model because it was, first of all, it was designed by Indigenous people, which, obviously that's what we're going for. And it was designed by the Native Youth Sexual Health Network in 2014. Very good foresight. This document's now 8 years old, but it's still viewed as kind of relevant when we're talking about and innovative when we're talking about, especially to Western institutions, about how we address community mental health and safety issues and addictions. And so really the 4 fires are cultural safety, reclamation, self-determination, and sovereignty. And so when we're looking at the 4 fire model, it's very different. So even just the analogy of fires versus pillars. So pillars, they're there. We don't have to look at them. We don't have to touch them. They are stable. There's the assumption that the structure is fine, even though we know that it could be rotten to the core. Versus the fire analogy is much more about tending to that fire. And so if you let it get too big, you're going to have problems. If you let it get too small, it's not going to do what it needs to do. And so it's a constant analysis and check, which can be exhausting, but it's necessary in order to ensure that we have a safe environment for us to deal with the issues that we deal with, either personally, as I said, or societally. And so the cultural safety is massive. I think a lot of times we get this pan-Indigenous viewpoint. Not everybody believes in the medicine wheel. Not everybody goes to sweat. Not everybody, I grew up in a Cree Métis community, but I'm Dene Métis. And so differences there, some similarities, but we have to make sure that the environments that we're creating are culturally safe so that people can adapt them to what they need. And then we also need to allow space for reclamation. And so this is often, although I'm 37, so I think most of the people on this call are wee children compared to me, but I'm a little bit jealous of the environment that y'all are in right now, because you all don't take a lot of shit, which is amazing. And you're very vocal about reclaiming space, reclaiming cultural practices. And I grew up, when I'd have to go to sweats, we weren't allowed to talk about going to sweats. And we were told not to, because either people wouldn't understand or it could cause us to come to violence or experience violence. And I actually found out, I went to the mountains with a friend of mine. This was maybe 10 years ago. I went to the mountains with a friend of mine. We were going mountain biking, and at night it was just the 2 of us, and we were talking, and it turned out we were going to the same sweat lodge, but on different evenings throughout most of our lives. But we didn't know each other because both of us were told not to talk about it, because the level of fear for ourselves from our parents was so heavy. And I think it's very important that when we're reclaiming these cultural practices now, that we're open about it. And you see that a lot more when it comes to members in the community, but also young folks reclaiming that and really not taking a lot of shit. And I think that also goes back to when we're talking about reclamation, in ceremony, it's I've been to ceremony with Two-Spirit folks. I've been to ceremony with queer folks, non-binary folks. And I think it's really important that we make space for people in those environments as well. And we have Jack Saddleback in Saskatoon, and we went to a sweat together, and the lodge keeper was saying, male on this side, female on this side, and Jack just was like, they'll go where they need to go or where they can. And then he was explaining to the man about non-binary and Two-Spirit and that type of thing. And really, Jack's very mild-mannered. He never swears. He's full of dad jokes. And he just was like, no, we're here, and we're not going to change who we are to suit who you are, because Two-Spirit people were allowed in lodges before they had their own lodges. My person who named me is Two-Spirited, and so I think it's important that we allow for that space as well within the community, so that we can actually feel welcome as a people in the community. And then self-determination. We have to let people decide for themselves when they're ready. Sometimes we will see institutions, workplaces, just assume that people want to partake in cultural ceremony. That's not necessarily the space. We at Prairie Harm Reduction, we opened up a youth home this last year, and some of the youth were pretty aggressive against participating in any cultural practices. And now they've opened up a bit, but we have to let them access it when they're ready, which can be difficult, especially during the pandemic, as we know a lot of ceremonies were kind of locked up. And I think we're going to see a big resurgence in this coming year or two about people getting back involved with ceremony. I'm very excited for this as well, because I'm going to a sweat for the first time in like a year on Saturday or Sunday. And then sovereignty. The principles of non-interference teach us to meet people where they're at, not forcing treatment. So once again, we shouldn't be forcing people do anything, including to subscribe to mental health plans that are based in colonial systems. We need to allow people the opportunity to access an elder, access a pipe carrier, a knowledge keeper in the community. It shouldn't just be you have to go see a counselor or something like that. We have to allow that flexibility, especially in a multicultural society like Canada. It's super important that we allow people to determine what they need to do for their mental health, and we don't force it. And you can do things like look at, if you're in a right position, you can look at ways to enhance benefits, or like I said, the sick time's a good example. As I said previously, the sick time's a good example of how you can allow people the sovereignty to make their own decisions on how they address their mental health issues and find support for their mental health. So often when we're talking about Indigenous mental health, we'll look at the medicine wheel model, which is the body, mind, emotional, spiritual, mental, and physical. And I think that that's really key for us as folks. I think I'm a good example. When I was building the safe consumption site, I was going to the gym at 6 a.m. every day for an hour. I was eating right. I was doing all the things right, but really I wasn't doing self-care on a lot I was reading a lot. So I felt like I was doing good, but really I was letting my emotions be neglected, and I was really letting my spirit be neglected. And I was basically using my body to try to fuel my, I was using the excuse of really doing a lot of physical self-care for not doing any spiritual self-care. I thought I was okay, but I clearly wasn't. I came out of that incredibly burnt out, and I had to do a lot of work to get back up to empty, so to speak. And so I think it's really important that when we're looking at where we are in our lives, that we analyze each separately. Don't think because you're addressing you're doing really well emotionally, that doesn't mean you're doing really well physically. That doesn't mean you're really doing well mentally. That means you're doing well emotionally. And if we're looking at the person as a whole, we have to do that as a whole. And I think it's important that we analyze each one. And so we came up with a self-assessment through the medicine wheel document. It's just an easy visual representation, because I think a lot of times we can like, I'm a very effective public speaker. I can talk my way in or out of anything, including a lot of trouble. But I can also make it seem like I'm doing better than I can. And so this is one of the ways that we implemented the medicine wheel self-care plan. So it actually people just color in the wheel, each little slice of pie there on the wheel, as much as they're doing. So if they're doing really well, so say I'm getting 8 hours of sleep, I'm not, but say I'm getting 8 hours of sleep each night, I would color in the sleep section right to the rim. But if I'm only getting 4 hours, I might be much lower down. And so we do this every month at Prairie Harm Reduction, or we did this every month when I was there at Prairie Harm Reduction, so that we could really get a good visual representation of where we're at on that month. And then we can also start to see the decline, because it's a good visual representation to see the decline or benefits of it. And then we make a self-care plan based off the areas that we're weakest in. And so we work with each employee on a self-care plan so that we can keep them accountable, and then they can keep themselves accountable. And then we do check-ins. We do check-ins every month when we do have our all staff meetings to look at this. I think, I think it's all easy to talk about the individual self-care. And I think it's important that we deal with that. But what do you do when we're hearing about murders? In Saskatchewan, we just heard about a body being found of somebody from Saskatoon. They just found her body this past week. So what do you do with that? Because you can do all the individual self-care if you want, but we're talking about society that's really rotten to the core, especially when it comes to Indigenous people. So how do we address that? How do we deal with that? That's a lot of strain to put on us. And so I think it's important that we look at systemic justice when we're talking about self-care, and systemic initiatives to deal with these types of injustices that we deal with as Indigenous people, because it also provides a healthy outlet. We had Colton Boushie, who was murdered by a farmer named Gerald Stanley. Gerald Stanley got away with murder. The RCMP purposely botched the investigation. They let the crime scene be exposed to the elements for multiple days to wash away any chance for blood splatter analysis to determine, did Gerald Stanley shoot him from the distance, he said, from the angle, he said. They purposely let that crime scene waste away so that they couldn't hold Gerald Stanley accountable. And I'm not going to go on a huge rant about, but this is a major form of injustice in an area where we have major forms of injustice continually happening, which is the prairies. When it comes to Indigenous people. And so there's a lot of anger that comes with that we can't ignore, and no amount of I honestly believe no amount of ceremony is going to make it better for the community. We really do need to have collective action where ceremony is included and is a major part of that, but we also need to be able to take our anger and do something with it, and that includes expressing it. So this is a Facebook post that I put up after the verdict came out at about, I was in Toronto midnight. I was there for conference, and I really felt lost because one, I was outside of my community when the verdict came down, so I couldn't grieve how I wanted to grieve. I couldn't grieve with the people I wanted to grieve with. But I was pissed, and so I think this is my motto, basically. Like, you're going to find out how dangerous Indigenous men can be, and that's because we're educated, we're motivated, and we're active in the community. And I think that we need to, when we're talking about mental health, we need to find outlets to help the community heal, but also ourselves as Indigenous people heal and grieve and anger and with our deal with our anger, because otherwise it's going to come out in bad ways. And that could mean addiction, that can mean self-harm, that could mean depression, that can mean a lot of things. And so we need those outlets. And so one of the ways that we get a lot of our outlet is, or I get a lot of my outlet is through funding the arts. So I was in the Prairie Harm Reduction, I was in a position where we could fund the arts. And so this is one of our designs that we did around the overdose crisis, but you can see it's being led by a Métis woman there that's standing on top of a burning car outside of the legislature, where all these people, despite the evidence that literally we're just in the overdose crisis, as an example, we're just asking for the ability to not die, and we keep getting met with all these stigmatizing language, and it's very similar to what we hear from around Indigenous issues, but it's just this ingrained belief in institutions are always right, no matter how unjust they are. And so we need to mobilize as a community and provide outlets for the community so that we can address it. So when the bodies were being found last summer, Chokecherry Studios, which actually this design is from Chokecherry Studios. We did a clothing line, a harm reduction clothing line with tarot cards a number of years ago. And this was the design. We donated 50% of the proceeds to Chokecherry, their local Indigenous youth art studio in Saskatoon. But this is the amount of people that showed up to march when we started finding bodies last summer of Indigenous children throughout. And this is in Saskatchewan. There's probably 3,000-4,000 people at this march. So this is me pointing the camera one way, people were just getting ready, and then this is me pointing the other. I think we took up about 4 city blocks on the march, and there's people from all different walks of life. And this is at the height of the pandemic, and it really brought the community together and helped the community heal, because we didn't really know what to do, but we knew we needed to come together, and we need to express that we as a community, this issue is important to us. And so I think that goes back to our approach when we're talking about these systemic injustices that we see as Indigenous people. It's important that we mobilize and make sure our voices are heard, because I know what it's like to be a Northern Indigenous kid in Saskatchewan and not feeling like anybody had your back or anybody was seeing or experiencing the things that you're experiencing. And when you feel like you're going crazy and you don't have those outlets, it's brutal, and you need to do something with that energy. And you can calm that energy down, but sometimes it's good to fuel that fire so that you get fired up, and then you're giving a lot of hope to people who oftentimes do not have a voice and who are hopeless. But when you can come together as a community, you really can mobilize on that. And that collective action is I think what's going to get us through. And my motto is speak loudly and carry a big stick. I don't have to be polite to people that their only vested interest is attacking me or destroying my way of being. I'm going to say, no, we're here. This is our space. I'm not going to be violent, but I'm not going to back down. And I think that that's important when we're talking about how to address the mental health issues that our communities face. We need to address the systemic injustices, because no amount of self-care planning is going to help us deal with the pressure that can be felt, internal pressure that can be felt when you're experiencing systemic injustice on an ongoing basis. So with that, I will thank you, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Now, I'm happy to introduce the panel discussion portion of our event, featuring thoughts from Jason, Chris, Debbie, and our 3 youth participants and advisory group members, Corinne Budge, James Young, and Grant Hopkins. Okay, so this question is for our youth, Corinne, James, and Grant. How do you build and care for your mental wellness? And let's start with, I'm going to say James.
For me, I try to establish a feel-good routine and try to open an invocation of the day, thanking for the water, air, and just the basic needs. And then I ask for inspiration and protection. And then I make a short list of things to accomplish during the day, just to focus. And then I remind myself of my resiliency by looking back on my journey and my sacrifices and how good I will feel once I reach my goals at the end of the day.
Miigwech, that was great. Okay,
Thank you.
Corinne, you look like you're ready.
One of the main things and most important things for me that I do is I celebrate every little milestone, because like I've been in recovery for almost 4 years, and something like I always, if I'm having a hard day or if I'm like not sure about like how I feel about something, I'm always like, okay, you know what? But this is how many days, and this is how many days that I'm gonna make it further. And like these are the little things that I did that I'm proud of, and the things that people are proud of me for. Um, and that's really like the most important way that I care for like my mental health and my mental wellness and stuff is just make sure I focus on celebrating every little thing, because every little thing matters. Every little thing is so important. I got up and I made my bed this morning. Yes. Awesome. Like it's small, but it's not, you know?
I do. Thank you for sharing. Grant, I'm going to repeat the question for everybody else. So, how do you build and care for your mental wellness?
I just start my day off just being thankful. Thankful that I woke up. Thankful that it's a new day because every day is going to be different. Um, and I take that little bit out in the morning to myself. Like I don't really talk. I just keep my eyes closed and I just sort of meditate a little bit and think about where I was yesterday and where I can go the next day, or how the next day or today is going to be going. For like example, I've been stressed out. Like I have a new baby on the way, so like I'm trying to keep it all together myself or my family as well. So it's just, yeah, it's like I like what Corrine said too. You got to celebrate everything. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to each of you for sharing your strategies with us and the way that you approach your day and your wellness. Okay, I've got a question now for our speakers and our knowledge keepers. What can students and youth personally do to support themselves around mental wellness and safer substance use?
I could jump in. I think one of the biggest things is be honest at where you're at. I think a lot of times people will lie. Like I'm in recovery. I think a lot of times people lie to themselves about where they're at, and I did that for years. But just be honest with where you're at, and if you are in a position where you are using or you're thinking about using, like I carry naloxone on me always, like just a nasal spray. It's in my pocket right now. It's really easy. You can bring and I think as status folks, you can get it covered for you. Not, I think I know you can get it covered for you from the federal government, but I just keep a naloxone spray in my pocket at all points in time because I never know what I'm gonna encounter, and I think that's really important. And then knowing what you're comfortable with for support. So sometimes that means you might not be talking to you might not be talking to somebody, and that includes a knowledge keeper or a lodge keeper about where you're at on your substance use journey, but you need to talk to somebody, whether that's a peer, whether that's an elder, whatever that is, and keep them in the loop, and then accessing however you view something that's good for your spirit. Because like our motto oftentimes is the opposite of addiction is connection, and so you need to connect with community. You need to connect with the culture. That's for me, anyways. That's what helped me get through it, and I think that's a good strategy. And then it's easy to say, very hard to do. Therapy is your friend a lot of times, especially as young people. You don't think it is, but it's good to have somebody that's just paid to listen to you complain about stuff. It's good for your soul to get that out there, and then to get some different perspective by somebody who's trained to do that. So I think those kind of are it for me.
Great, thank you for sharing. Chris.
Yeah, no, I think Jason said it really, really well. I think our youth said it really, really well. What we're really talking about is a whole range of things, and they don't all have to happen at once, right? They have to happen in a way that works, in a way that is doable. There's a lot to be said for incremental change. Oftentimes, we want really big change really quickly, and that's an okay goal too. But sometimes it's a matter of a whole series of small things, and then eventually, when you look back on those series of small things, you're way further from that thing than you were. And the thing about incremental change is that those are the doable things. You know, we heard from James, wakes up each day, puts together a list of things that he can complete that day and accomplish. Like that's brilliant to me. You know, I see so much value in helping orient ourselves around those things that we can do to move ourselves forward in little bits. But I would reinforce again what Jason said, and certainly the individual level strategies that the young people said. But then, you know, it's in connecting and outreach to some of those more specialized um, um, services that can work with the other things that you're doing. So it's sometimes hard when everything seems to be working in different goals. And I think that, you know, finding the right place is an important part too.
Okay, Debbie.
First of all, Miigwech, Christopher and Jason, for your words. They they really touched, and I'm like, yeah, I want to learn those tools too. And for the youth, I started my journey 25 years ago, when I was recovering from my alcohol use, and I struggled finding that person that would help me. I finally found an elder in Sioux Valley, which was 40 minutes away, and he he took me on and he helped me, and I too had to be honest, like honest where I was, because when people come to us for help, you see them one week when they're they're doing okay, and then you don't see them for a week or two, and you're wondering, are they safe, are they okay, or like what are they up to, and then they'll call you out of the blue. And so yeah, it's important to be connected and speak your truth, and because we're here, our doors are open. We like we have a smudge ready if you want to go, or medicines or medicine tea, like we're here to help. And so yeah, it's just and I like how, I woke up and I made my bed. And one of my elders too told me that's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning is you make your bed, because if you don't make your bed, your spirit stays there. So you're looking after your spirit. So once you start knowing that you look after spirit first, then everything else will fall into place. So yeah, it's just it's good to those little baby steps, be thankful in the morning and grateful when you go to bed, and so all day long, just be thankful for the nebe, for the spring, for the medicines, everything that's coming. So yeah, so just continue doing that good work, and congratulations on a new baby coming. Those are blessings. Those are blessings. Babies come to bring us that change. They're coming to bring us that change, and they're bringing us teachings. So congratulations, Grant, on the baby coming. Chimigwech.
Thank
Wow,
you.
Miigwech. Ron.
Bonjour. I just wanted to just highlight how impressed I am and so grateful to have heard amazing messages and ideas from people, and to see so many of our family members, and we're all been placed on earth for a purpose, and it's good to follow these beautiful journeys. I too am no different. I come from families that had issues, and those ones involved alcohol abuse. And I have my late father, being from Kuchiching, was a residential school survivor, and our mother, who's going to be turning 80 years old next month, she lives in Saskatoon, from Thunderchild, and also a residential school survivor. I'm the oldest in our family of the children they they had. And at the age of 19, I entered a program in recovery and sought sobriety. And I've been sober for over 42 years now. And I'm just so happy to see our young people embrace these concepts of well-being and to be brave, that there's so much good people out there that will literally bend over backwards to help you. That's how much we love you and we care for you, and we want to see only good things be for you. And yet when you hear our messages from the old people, that's how we always talk. Uh, for me, growing up, I felt that I was disconnected and felt very lonesome. I remember feeling very, very lonely, especially towards the end of my decision that I had to stop my drinking and my using. And this is in my Thunder Bay days. And, I was kicked out of high school, I was kicked out of the house. I was starting to uh, live a very unhealthy life and lots of trouble with the police, those sorts of things. And of course, my mental well-being, as we call that. Anishinaabe people, we have a word for that. It's called gashkendam. Gashkendam is when you don't feel balanced. You're out of connection. You're not healthy. You're feeling negative. That sort of thing, all rolled up into that word gashkendam. And I guess in English you call that depression. And all of that I inherited probably from residential schools that my parents had yet to be healed when they started having their children, and colonial history. All of that thing probably had a role in how I started to deal with my life. But I always knew that deep down, I knew that there's a better way of life to live and to ask for help. And one of the ideas that I learned many years ago was I was invited to go to a treatment program in Pioneer House, Minnesota. And I was a counselor in those days, working at a treatment center in Thunder Bay. And I remember sitting in group. I was probably 21, 22 years old, and 3-4 years sober already. And I remember sitting in group, and I remember a young teenager was so distraught. She was so upset, and she had her hand in her head in her hands like that, and she was in group therapy. And I remember her telling a group she felt so lost that she didn't know if she was going to make it or not, and that she didn't know which way to turn. And I could feel for her, because I know that feeling as a teenager. And I'll never forget what the counselor told her was that she said to her, recovery is simple, she says. Recovery is easy. And that young teenager looked up at her, and the counselor said to her and looked her right in the eyes and said, all you have to do is be willing to change your entire life. And that's all she said. And I remember the impact that message had on that young teenager, how she knew deep down that counselor was right. All that about recovery is easy. Sobriety is simple. All you have to do is change your whole life. So that message was instilled in her, and that's the sort of message that got instilled in me. I know for me, I had to be mentored by other men. So I have two amazing friendships with Anishinaabe men in Thunder Bay. One is Elder Gene Nalgijik from Gull Bay First Nation, and the other is a pastor. His name is Pastor Roma Fisher from Long Lac First Nation, but he has a group in the city of Thunder Bay, and they do a lot of good work. And it was these two men that took me under their wing when I was 19 years old. They used to see me drinking. They used to see me getting in trouble. They used to see me upset. They would drive me home. They'd be nice to me. They never criticized me. I just felt that these were the guys that were going to be there to save my life. And today I'm over 60 years old. I have grandchildren. I'm a retired man. I'm a professional, and all of these things I'm very grateful for because of the paths that these people showed me, especially Elder Gene Nalgijik. He introduced me to our sweat lodge. He introduced me to that culture way of life. And it's a beautiful way of life. One of the things that I participated in when I was in my early 20s was a very strong part of Anishinaabe ceremonies. Is called the fasting ceremony. And we go fast, we go without food or water, and some of us can go up to 4 days long. And they fasted us on Mount McKay, Nimkiwaju. We call that the Nimkiwaju. It's Mount McKay in Thunder Bay, and we climbed up that mountain in the mid 80s, and we did our fasting ceremony up there to be without food or water for that period. And I remember the old elder that brought us there, and when he told us, he said, when you look on that mountain, my boy, he says, there's a drum on that mountain. There's a sacred drum on that mountain. And in my way of thinking, I was in university in the early 80s. I was at Lakehead University. I was getting my university degree. I'd gone back to school, and I was taking anthropology courses. And I remember thinking to myself, I bet you he's talking about a petrified drum. You know, I'm going to find that drum up there, and I'm going to be famous. You know, I'm going to write about it in my essays. And here all this time, he wasn't even talking about that drum, because over the years, I found out that on Mount McKay at Nimkiwaju, there's a lock that's up there. There's a lock of water up in that mountain area. Beautiful fresh water. And years later, I attended a sweat lodge ceremony, and I got to participate in, it's called a little water boy drum ceremony. There's a little drum you hold in your lap, and it has a little plug at the little boy's nose, and you sit with that drum inside the lodge, and you hold that drum, and you start to talk, and you start to cry. You get very, very emotional. And I remember weeping like that inside the lodge, and I felt so connected, because that little boy water drum was there to heal me. And then I realized that's what that elder was talking about. You know, Mount McKay has a water drum up there. That's why our ancestors fasted up there for thousands of years. And that old man was showing me stories. So this is how we learn. You participate in your ceremonies, you learn your language, and you don't have to learn right away. Some of these teachings will come to you 5 years later, 6 years from now, 7 years from now, 20 years from now. You know, and that's sort of how our Creator puts these journeys in our path. And that's how we become super intelligent human beings. And I'm just very, very grateful to be part of this sacred event that we're having. Aho, mi'iwe.
Wow, miigwech. So, you know, we are technically just past 1:30, but I know that there are questions that some of our guests have asked. So I'm going to ask one of those questions, and then I'm going to follow up with one more rapid round of questions, and then we'll wrap up. So this is a big question, and it's for Jason primarily. I really enjoyed this concept of systemic justice for Indigenous people when experiencing a collective trauma hurt. What are some ways that folks can hold space for systemic justice? Do you think that is our place or institutional / society? A big question, and it came there out of our chat.
Yeah, I think like we often we'll talk about like emotional labor, and we're not going to do the work for, you know, other folks and that type of thing. But let's just be real, like the institutions aren't going to give us that space. They're just not. And so you have to claim it. And I'm not saying run into it like a bull in a china shop, but you need to position yourself, or, you know, there's a lot of power in collective action. You can get together with like-minded folks to address something. It can be like some of our initiatives before we did protests started off as like our Instagram page. We just started talking about these issues on our social media. You know, and then it became, we started doing art action, and then it started to go, and then it's like, it took 3 years, and then we're in the streets all the time talking about the issues that we're dealing with. But I don't think that'd be possible without Indigenous leadership to start. I think PHR now is going to be great under Caleb, but I think it really was key for us to have Indigenous leadership and staff in place for that. But that took me 15 years before anybody would give me a sniff at being an executive director. And so you have to put in a lot of hours sometimes to even get the opportunity. But that doesn't mean, like, you look at the Indigenous Harm Reduction, Toronto Indigenous Harm Reduction Group, or the Native Art Society in Toronto, like they just started doing it, and then it grew. And I think if there's something that you're passionate on, you can either find like-minded folks, or you can just start doing it, and you'd be surprised at how many people will gravitate towards you when you start doing those types of initiatives. And the like attract like, where you get people that are in that same mindset as you. And so I think it's up to us to reclaim that space, sometimes aggressively, sometimes strategically, or sometimes just create new space where we can have those types of conversations. And I think, I think I'm blessed to be in the position I'm in, but that comes from years of eating shit from racist employers. Like, where I just had to, and I think I'm lucky because I'm light skinned on that. So they felt like I've seen my brown skin colleagues say the exact same thing I did. And when they did, it's aggressive. It's, you pick the language. But when I said it, it was like, oh, we'll listen to Jason because I look a certain way, right? And so I think in terms of that, yeah, you kind of have to be creative and then just know when you've had enough. And if you've had enough, that goes back to reclaiming, or you don't have the emotional energy to do the education, to try to get in with an institution and convince them, because they can also just keep you there spinning your wheels forever. I've seen that happen where they'll give you lip service, but they don't actually give you any power or decision-making ability. And so sometimes that's where it goes to, you need to create your own space for that. And I think it's important to get the institutions to change, but sometimes we just have to lead that change ourselves. And you'd be surprised at what type of things can come about those grassroots initiatives. It takes time and it's exhausting, and sometimes it's going to cause friendships, families to fall apart, but it's worthwhile in the end, I think.
Now, Miigwech, that was a loaded question. You did a great job giving us a response. Okay, rapid round. Here we go. Everybody's going to have a turn, and I'm going to start with Chris. Same question for everybody. What is one thing that you would tell your younger self?
It'll work out. Some things won't, though.
Debbie.
Oh, okay. That's a hard one. You got this. It took me a long time. I've been on this journey for over 25 years. And when I look back and I think, wow, like it's just, for me, I hang on to, when I find an elder and a knowledge keeper, I hang on to them and I follow them around. I just listen to their teachings, and I'm just so hungry for this knowledge. Like I never knew any tradition or culture till I was about 25, and then when I heard that drum, and the very first time I heard that drum, I knew I had to keep following that drum. And Ron mentioned going on those vision quests. I did 4 vision quests, and that's when I really found myself, was sitting out on the land for 4 days and sitting with the wood ticks. And that's where I really learned about my identity and where I came from, and why did I carry those deep rooted, because it came from my ancestors that never got that chance to do that healing work. So then you're wondering, well, why was it left to me? Because I don't want my kids or my grandkids to have that struggle as well. So if you can get out and do those berry fasts, those full moon ceremonies, attend whatever ceremony, go sit out on the mountain all by yourself, and you will find that drum, like Ron said. Those songs will come, all that stuff will come. You just got to listen. So yeah, I didn't believe I could do it, but I did it. Miigwech.
Okay. Ron.
For me, Nokomus Bun, my late grandmother from Kuchiching. I lived with her when I was a little boy in the 1960s. And she's a very beautiful, caring woman. I recall how connected I had, a beautiful connection I had with her as her little boy, her grandson. And I loved her dearly. We call her Kukum. And I remember she used to send me birthday cards every year on my birthday. She'd get a little birthday card. Didn't matter where I was living, whether I was living with my mom and dad or I was traveling. Because after I left her as a little boy, I moved away to live with my parents. But I remember every birthday card I would get, she'd always underline certain words in those birthday messages. And I collected them over the years, and I realized there was a connection I started learning about. And quite often she would underline words like be good, do good, have a good day. And she just underlined those words. And I connected years later. I was talking to my auntie, Ida Linklater. She was telling me stories of how rough she had it. Her mom, or my grandmother, growing up as a orphan child. She was a residential school product. Um, as a little boy, I remember she spoke beautiful Anishinaabe. I remember the old people, some of the old people in Couchiching, they'd be speaking this weird, weird sound, these noises that are coming out of their mouths. And here they were talking Anishinaabe. But yet, when they looked down and looked at me, what came out of their mouths was English. That's why I became such a good English speaker. And I learned years later from one of my stories from my aunties is when some of our grandmothers, when they were little children and they were going to residential school, if they were caught speaking the language, one of them had the back of an orange peel squeezed into their eyes. And my grandmother must have felt so painful when that happened to her as a little 5-6-year-old girl, for that to be punished that way, to speak for their language. And she probably had that memory in her mind when she had her own children eventually. And then those children, gave birth to their children. That's how I came along as a grandson, as a grandchild. And around 5-6 years of age, I'm sure that's what probably what she was thinking about. If I speak Anishinaabe to this little Nojusuk of mine, this little grandson of mine, maybe I'll be punished. Maybe he'll be punished that same way. So I think in their hearts, they were trying their best to protect us. Many of them they're very regretful now for not teaching us the language to learn that beautiful way. But it's something that we have to take and embark on ourselves now, is we have to learn our connection with our languages. And we get that through our ceremonies and through people that are very fluent in our dialects and that sort of thing. But that's what old my Gukum would talk. And in her language, as I said before, Minopa Matsuin is our way of living the good life. In some way, she was code talking to me. She was code talking, and she was underlining in English because she was still fearful of the Indian agents. They might criticize her for teaching us that culture. So I give that to my relations. Hope that makes sense for you. How meet you way.
All right, we're going to listen. In case you hadn't noticed yet, I'm saving our youth for the last. So Jason, rapid fire. One thing you tell your younger self, and then we're going to turn it over to our young people. Go.
I'd say instead of suppressing your anger, embrace it. But that's not an excuse to be an asshole.
Miigwech. All right, James.
Yeah, for me, I would say try to reparent your inner self. Forgive yourself and reparent your inner child by self-assurance and guidance. Give yourself what you always know you needed. You always know you need it. And just trust your instincts, trust your intuition, and don't second guess it. And be the judge of your teaching. You be the judge of the teaching presented to you, and question everything. And you have to tap into what your body and mind really needs. So don't waste your life and say yes to everything.
Oh, and Corinne, we're turning it over to you now.
I'd say your addiction and your trauma don't make you a bad person. You're going to lose a lot, but you're going to gain so much more. I'm so proud of you. And one day I'm going to be someone that you could be proud of too.
That was beautiful. Wow. Now I have to put my words back together. Thank you so much for sharing those teachings with us. And I just want to thank everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Special thank you to our speakers, Dr. Christopher Mushquash and Jason Mercredi, our knowledge keeper, Debbie Huntinghawk, our elder, Ron Linkletter, and our youth panelists, Corinne, James, and Grant. Thank you so much. We are grateful that you've shared your knowledge and your time with us this afternoon. Of course, we'd also like to thank again our sponsors, the Slate Family Foundation, who made this important event possible and enabled us to partner with CAMH, with the Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario, and with Shkaabe Makwa. And we also like to acknowledge the other sponsors of our Rivers to Success mentorship program, especially major sponsors, the Barry and Laurie Green Family Charitable Trust, and Alan and Gil Gray Philanthropy. Finally, a heartfelt thank you to all of you who joined us today. We appreciate the insightful questions and contributions to the conversation that you all shared. We'd love to hear from you. We hope that you'll join us for our next Indigenous Mental Health and Wellness event. If you need help, if you need support, please reach out. We've given lots of, I think, helplines, and also you have us as well. Nahau, Miigwech, Minawag. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you again.